All right, I think we're live now. Wasn't quite working there for a minute. Give folks a chance to join. I looked for this forever yesterday. I found another one in the bedroom with penguins on it. Namaskar, Dada Veda, welcome. I just had a little accident. I spilled my whole ice water all over the floor. Carrie's cleaning it up for me. So nice. I still have my coffee though. With stevia, no cream today. I'm on clear liquids today. Wish me luck. I see Dada Veda's here. I think Julie might be here, if this is correct. Anybody else? Thank you, Carrie. Here's Scuzzlebutt. Can you see him? Here, let's... Scuzzlebutt's ready for story time. And there's Jasper behind me, right over my shoulder. Gotta get comfy. Scuzzlebutt, wanna say hi? Julie's here saying Jasper Doodle. Do you think we need to remind the Pride Doodles that I'm live? There, now you can see more of Scuzzlebutt. I'm okay, Julie. How are you? I'm drinking my coffee with stevia, no cream. I spilled my ice water all over the floor. We're not off to the best start. I did get a workout in already today, though. Tafid, welcome. How are you? Yep, here's Scuzzlebutt. And Jasper is right there. Jasper, are you awake? Jasper, wake up. Say hello. Jasper Dodo. Scuzzlebutt's like, why are you talking to him when you could be petting me? Y'all got your coffee, like I do? Oh, where are you going? Oh, you're following my hand, I see. You want to sit on my lap? You can sit on my lap if you want to. All right, he moved out of the frame, but hopefully he'll come back. Teffy's watching with his cat Nutella. Aww. See if I can back this up anymore. All right. That's a little better. Scuzzlebutt, you just want all the love'ems. Are we ready for chapter 3 of Dada Veda's spiritual memoir, From Brooklyn to Benares and Back? I think we are. The folks that miss it or show up late will be able to catch whatever they missed on the replay, which is on my YouTube channel. Julie, I have to drink it at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. and my appointment's at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you for your prayers. Oh wait, we're not on chapter 3, we're on chapter 4, aren't we? I was wrong. I said it was chapter 3, but I'm pretty sure we're on chapter 4 now. We are. Chapter 4. I become a monk. Early on in my life with Ananda Marga, I was ready to give up everything and become a monk. I was greatly attracted to all things spiritual, and I also enjoyed the good feelings that I got when I shared spiritual teachings with others. So it was not a question of if I would go to training and become a monk and full-time worker for the mission, but when I would go. As I got involved with the work of the Sadvipro newspaper and then the Universal Times and Prout work, it became difficult to extricate myself from my commitments and leave for training. My biggest problem was finding someone to take over my work on the newspaper. So I just continued working, but finally, in the summer of 1976, I decided that I had waited long enough. I told Dada why to find a replacement because in 6 months I would be leaving for training. Dada found a team of Margis who said that they would look after my work, and I got ready to prepare for training. Shortly after my trip to New Haven, I moved to Washington, D.C., which had been my home for the past 3 years, to Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, I stayed in an enormous Ananda Marga center known as Baba's Castle. This Jagrati had been a funeral home before Ananda Marga purchased it. It was old and needed repair, and with its high ceilings was hard to heat. However, I was not concerned with the castle. My mind was fixed on earning money for my ticket on the to the training center in Sweden, and to have some money to contribute for my upkeep there. I got work at various temporary agencies, working in offices as a typist and sometimes in stock rooms. After a few months, I earned enough money and was ready to go to Sweden. Gotta make a little room for Skaz. I waited till the first week of January 1977. This allowed me to attend the winter retreat. I had been to all the twice-yearly retreats that had been held in the U.S. starting in the summer of 1971, and I didn't want to miss the winter retreat. The retreat was held in Kansas, and when the retreat ended, I drove back with some Margis to New York. It was very cold, and the roads were glazed with ice, but we made it back safely, even though one of the Margi cars was involved in a minor accident. I now got ready for my big adventure. There were 5 of us who planned on entering the training center, and we arranged to travel together. First, we boarded a plane for Frankfurt. While we were on the plane, I glanced across the aisle at one of the Margi brothers in our team. He had the tray table down, and on it was a bunch of chocolate candy bars that he was busy eating one by one. I was surprised because we normally didn't eat chocolate. Chocolate is a mild stimulant, and according to the yogic classification of food, falls into a category of foods that is fine in moderation for most people, but which was not taken at all by yogic monks and nuns. Also, those people who were working as full-time volunteers for Ananda Marga, with an eye on eventually becoming a monk or nun, did not eat chocolate products. "What are you doing?" I said to him across the aisle. "I'm eating them now because once we enter training, I won't be able to do it again," he replied. We landed at Frankfurt Airport and stayed a brief time at the Ananda Marga Center in nearby Maine. After a short rest, we all got on the train and traveled to Copenhagen, and from there to the training center, which was nestled in a small remote village in central Sweden. The training center had been set up in Sweden in 1975. Prior to that time, all trainees had to go to India for training. However, due to the persecution of Ananda Marga in India, it had become difficult to train everyone there, which is why the center in Sweden was established. The training center consisted of 2 houses, one for the nuns, or deities, and one for the monks, the Dadas. The house of the monks had formerly been a theater and a dance hall. Dada Dirty Bodananda came to Sweden at the beginning of 1975, and with the help of local Margis, he purchased this former theater and began to remodel it to make it suitable for use as a training center. When we arrived there in the first week of 1977, the entire village was covered in snow so deep it rose above the height of a car parked near the training center. Some of the drifts almost reached the gutters of the roof. Just after entering the training center, I went into the bathroom. One of the new trainees who had arrived with me on the flight from the U.S. followed me in. The house was heated by a combination of wood fires and electric space heaters, but we saw ice on the floors and the walls of the bathroom. We looked at each other and he said to me, "How are we going to survive?" Somehow we did survive. There were 14 young men in our training session. On the first day of training, the trainer called us all together and asked us each to tell our personal stories about how we had reached the training center. One by one, we narrated our stories. When it was all over, I found it remarkable that although some of the details were different, we all had pretty much the same story to tell. How we came of age, looked around, and tried to get satisfaction in the mundane world, and then were drawn like iron to the magnet of the spiritual path, and finally to the training center. Hi TBC, welcome. How are you? Dada D told us that the main thing we had to do in the training center was to follow the schedule. The schedule consisted of getting up before 5 o'clock in the morning and attending sessions of collective meditation classes and self-study, concluding the day with chanting and meditation. It was a rigorous routine, but it gave me the chance to read all of the books that Baba had written, at least all the books that had been translated into English up to that time. We prepared our meals collectively, taking turns in the kitchen according to a duty roster. Normally, we were not allowed any spices except for salt, but somehow the collective feeling and good vibrations transformed that simple food into the best tasting meals I had ever experienced. On festival days, we were allowed to use spices and oils and prepared special meals that were also very good. With a lot of meditation, chanting, and study, the days passed quickly, and the Swedish winter gradually transformed into spring. In the middle of the winter, it got dark early in the afternoon. It was still cold in spring, but now we enjoyed more hours of daylight. Sometime in June, we were deemed ready to take our examinations. We had studied the conduct rules and spiritual and social philosophy of Ananda Marga, and also Bengali and Sanskrit. The most difficult part was to memorize Sanskrit poems called shlokas. These shlokas are verses from the various Indian scriptures, Vedas and Tantric scriptures, and other ancient texts that usually encapsulated a vast amount of spiritual truth in just a few sentences. Traditionally, spiritual teachers used them as a means to begin discourses on spiritual and philosophical topics. Another important part of the syllabus was to memorize and to be able to elucidate the aphorisms, 2-line couplets, in which the entire Ananda Marga philosophy was laid out. These aphorisms are known as sutras in Sanskrit, and the particular sutras that we were studying were contained in a book called Ananda Sutram. It is a thin book with the couplets followed by a short purport explaining their meaning. However, the subject matter was vast in scope, dealing with the nature of consciousness, the relationship of matter, mind, and consciousness, the supreme consciousness, the origin of the universe, the layers of the mind, the mysteries of life, death, and rebirth, the nature of Kundalini, the coiled spiritual force residing in all humans, and social matters in the last chapter. That last chapter is revolutionary. Up until now, never had a book of spiritual aphorisms contained an analysis of how society evolved and how ethical people could use this understanding to build an exploitation-free society. But Ananda Sutram did all of these things. I memorized the sutras and got ready for the oral exam. Our examiner was Didi Ananda Mitra. Didi was one of the first Americans to have been initiated into Ananda Marga. She was a Fulbright scholar, studying in the Philippines when she met an Ananda Marga monk in 1968. She eventually went on to write some of the basic introductory books for Ananda Marga. I passed the test, and afterward the examiner verified my handwritten diaries, which contained our conduct rules and information that we would need to properly impart spiritual lessons to those who would be attracted to our path. That was July 7, 1977. The first part of our training had more or less come to an end. I say more or less because to become certified as Acharyas of Ananda Marga, each of the trainees would have to go to India to spend a short time at the training center in Benares, Varanasi. For me, this wouldn't happen until January 1981, but in the interim, I was eligible to teach Ananda Marga meditation. I was given a new name, Dada Veda Garbha, Brahmachari. Veda means knowledge, and Garbha means womb. So one translation of Veda Garbha is the source of all spiritual knowledge. In 1979, when I had personal contact with Baba, he elaborated further on the meaning of my name. The first lecture in Sweden. Now that I was no longer a trainee, I was ready to begin my work as an Ananda Marga monk, but I was stuck in the training center. I received a posting and was supposed to go to Hong Kong sector, the Ananda Marga designation for the countries of the Far East, which included Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, North Korea, Hong Kong, and the eastern part of the then Soviet Union. However, I never heard from the Ananda Marga office of Hong Kong sector. Without a ticket to the Far East, I had to sit in the training center. By this time, I was tired of the austerity. Meals were simple and sometimes skimpy, and every morning we marched to a nearby lake to take our baths. The trainer said we were doing it to save money on the utilities, but I think he really did it to toughen us up and make us ready to endure in all kinds of conditions. However, at that time I was not thinking of all kinds of conditions. I was remembering how my own acharya back in the U.S. was able to fly to cities all over the country. Wherever he went, people took good care of him with comfortable accommodations and great food. I think my trainer sensed my impatience. He suggested that I go to a nearby coastal city of Västervik to organize a lecture and try to teach some people meditation. When I got ready to depart, I ran into my first big problem, tying my turban properly. I tried once, but it did not look very good, and someone suggested that I do it again before leaving the house. The second version was better, and I was ready to bolt out the door. Just as I was leaving, one of the other trainees suggested that I take along a portable tent. I didn't think I would need it, but I put it into my backpack. I had to hitchhike since I only had a few Swedish kroner in my pocket. There was no Ananda Marga Center or Ananda Marga members in Västervik, nor were there any contact addresses for sympathizers who might be able to help me. I was on my own. The hitchhiking went well, and I reached Västervik without any trouble. Once I got there, I adopted a plan of action that I was to use several more times in the years ahead, whenever I went to a place without Ananda Marga infrastructure. The first thing I needed was a place to give a lecture, so I went around the small and picturesque city until I found a small health center. I inquired if they could offer me a place where I could hold a meeting. They did in fact have a very good meeting room and said that I could use it free of charge, so I fixed the time and date for a few days later. The next thing I did was to publicize the lecture. First, I went to a local newspaper and asked to speak with a journalist. When I got in his office, I explained that I was a yoga teacher and was going to give a lecture in the next few days. I got on the floor and demonstrated the peacock posture, in which I balanced my whole horizontally extended body on my elbows as my hands supported me on the floor. He took a photo of this impressive-looking posture, and it appeared in the newspaper the day before my lecture with a short write-up about the event. The next step was to get some kind of poster or leaflet printed. Somehow I was able to find someone who gave me free photocopies and also the use of a typewriter. I was able to make a basic information sheet about the lecture that I put up around town and handed out to people whom I met during my stay there. When these things had been taken care of, I turned my attention to my personal situation. I had not spent any of my meager pocket money on transportation or on publicity for the lecture, but I needed somewhere to sleep and some food. The health center didn't offer me accommodations to me, so I had to find an alternative. I remembered the tent in my backpack and went to a campground on the edge of town. I was able to find a place under a tree and set up this very simple tent, which was nothing more than a cord tied to a tree and attached to a stick in the ground with a piece of plastic draped over it to provide some covering. I had a sleeping bag, and that was enough. I crawled into the bag and got some sleep. In morning, I thought I would be able to use the showers at the campground, but when I got into the shower house, I found that they were coin-operated. They weren't expensive, but it was beyond my means. There was a lake at the campsite, so early in the morning, I went to the lake to take my bath, just like at the training center. Next, I had to tackle the food problem. I walked around Västervik and approached some shopkeepers, inquiring if they had any food that they could not sell, either because it was expired or because there were blemishes on the fruits or vegetables. I managed to get some fruit, vegetables, and bread and took everything back to the campsite for a meal. During my free time, I wandered around the city and talked to people, handing out leaflets to anyone who seemed interested in my activities. While in town, I met an Indian-born merchant who sympathized with me and offered me food from his shop. Finally, the day of the lecture arrived. About 10 to 15 people were on hand for the event, and I proceeded to give the first of many lectures in which I explained that human beings are unsatisfied because they thirst for infinite happiness, but try to quench this thirst with finite objects. I explained that meditation helped one to move on the path towards the infinite entity, the supreme consciousness, and that the realization of the supreme consciousness would finally satisfy our desire for unending happiness and bliss. One girl about 18 years of age wanted to learn meditation. I think more people would have been interested, but just before I left the training center, someone had given me instructions not to invite questions at the end of the lecture. It was bad advice, but in any case, there was someone who wanted to learn meditation. In those days, Anandamarga monks were allowed to give instruction to women, but within the next year and a half, Baba instructed us only to teach men. Women would be taught by the nuns. The young girl came to see me, and I taught her the process of simple mantra meditation. As I imparted the instructions, I felt a tremendous wave of spiritual energy enveloping us. It was, I believe, the presence of the Guru. I told her to close her eyes and start meditating, and I'm certain that she also felt this wave of spiritual energy, because when I told her to open her eyes, she looked like she was coming out of a deep trance. So my mission had been accomplished, almost. After the lecture, the manager of the health center said that I could stay there for my last night in Västervik. He also offered me some nice Swedish cheese and other delicacies. For one night, I got the kind of treatment that I had seen lavished on acharyas in the U.S. The next day, I was ready to go back to the training center. I had the newspaper clipping announcing my lecture as a souvenir, as well as a bag of fruit provided by the Indian businessman. It was a successful end to my first adventure spreading spirituality outside my home country. Looks like Odd is enjoying it. I start work in France. When I was near the end of my Acharya training, I began to think of where I might be posted. I had studied Spanish for 3 years in high school and 1 year in college, so I thought that maybe I would be sent to Spain or a Spanish-speaking country. Well, that did not happen. One day, the trainer told me that my assignment was Regional Secretary Hong Kong, and then for a few days I started to prepare my mind for that. However, after a short time, I was given a new assignment, Regional Secretary for Paris Region. Paris Region is the Anandamarga designation for France. I would be going to France to take over from another monk who was being transferred to a new posting. From Sweden, I traveled by train to Berlin. Paris Region was part of Berlin Sector, the Anandamarga designation for Europe, and the headquarters of Berlin Sector was at that time in West Berlin. The Anandamarga office in Berlin was in an apartment with high ceilings in an old building. This was my first time in West Berlin. At that time, it was a divided city, and West Berlin was an island surrounded by communist East Germany. You could still see bullet marks from World War II on some of the buildings. In the Berlin office, I met Dada Karanunanda, the monk in charge of Anandamarga activity in Europe. Anandamarga was first introduced to Europe in 1969 by Dada Advaishananda, but it really took off in the years 1972 to 77. It was especially active in England, Scandinavia, Germany, and Italy. Young people of the hippie generation flocked to Anandamarga retreats, and many became full-time volunteers for the organization. Our activities in France had only started in 1976, and there were few Margis in the country. While I was in Berlin, a very senior Dada from India was visiting the office. When he met me, he hugged me and later predicted to Dada K that I would be successful in my mission in France. Dada K told me about this, but I didn't think much of it because I expected to do well regardless of anyone's opinion or prediction. At that time, I didn't know that a high proportion of acharyas are not able to maintain their status as monks or nuns, and that being a full-time Anandamarga missionary is much harder than most people realize. I also wasn't aware that France was considered a very difficult place to work. I was given a train ticket to France, and one Margi took me to the Berlin train station. I had to change trains, but finally arrived in the city of Lyon, where the Anandamarga's regional headquarters was located. During the train ride, I did not speak to anyone, and when I got to Lyon, I somehow managed to go from the bus station to the apartment where the Dada and 3 Margi brothers were staying. The apartment where I stayed that first night was only temporary, as we would soon be moving to a large apartment in another part of the city. Vishal, Ramakrishna, and Govinda were the 3 local full-timers who were living with Dada Vakaspati. Their job consisted of teaching yoga classes, setting up lectures, and assisting the acharya in social service activities and spreading spirituality. After a few days, we moved to the new apartment. It had previously been used by a French religious society called the Friends of Man and had a large hall that could seat up to 100. It had 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen. As was the custom in France at that time, we had to buy the lease from the previous tenant. The apartment building was situated in what was called the Arab Quarter. It was populated by immigrants from North Africa, and though the area was run down, its oriental grocery stores, sweet shops, and tea houses gave it a colorful and exotic feeling. As soon as I arrived, I wanted to get out and start teaching meditation. It was August, and August in Europe is not a good time to organize any kind of activity, as most people are away on vacations. The brothers told me that we would be doing a whole series of lectures starting in September when the vacation period ended, but I wanted to get started immediately. So I went with Ramakrishna to a busy pedestrian street in the heart of Lyon's shopping district and just sat there on the ground doing meditation. Ramakrishna stood watch while I was meditating, and when a sizable crowd gathered, he explained what was going on. When I opened my eyes, I was able to talk with some of the people whom Ramakrishna had spoken with, and a few of them followed us back to our apartment to learn meditation. This was my first taste of what was to come in the next 5 years. And here is a photo of Ramakrishna and Dada Veda on a street in Lyon, France. My first lecture in French. When I arrived in France in the summer of 1977, you absolutely had to speak French if you were to get along. It was difficult to find people who knew English or who would converse with you in English. I was going to have to learn French and learn it quickly. Govinda and Ramakrishna, the native French volunteers, started me off on my French studies. We purchased the book French Without Toil, and Govinda and Ramakrishna recorded a cassette to go along with the text. I studied every day and did my best to learn this new language. I also helped prepare for some of the coming lectures in Lyon by putting up posters for the upcoming events. The first full sentence that I learned in French was "Est-ce que je peux mettre une affiche?" which means, can I put up a poster? I went around to many shops in Lyon asking if I could put posters for my coming lectures there. One thing that really helped me to learn the language was traveling and visiting some of our yoga contacts. I spent a weekend with one man who lived in a city near Lyon. When I got there, I found out that he did not speak a word of English, so for the whole weekend I had to communicate in French, which helped me to improve. I was getting my feet wet with this language, but I was not prepared for my first language test. In addition to preparing lectures for me in Lyon, some of the Margis set up lectures in nearby cities. 3 weeks after my arrival in Lyon, a lecture was set up in Valence, a city south of Lyon. One Margi arranged a hall and put up posters for my lecture. The plan was that I would travel down to Valence alone and meet up with a Margi who was to translate the lecture. I made it to Valence by train and found the lecture hall. It was early, so I did my evening meditation there. When I finished, I was still alone. No one had come to do the translation. As it got close to the announced time for the event, people started filing into the hall and seated themselves. One woman even put a tape recorder on the podium to record the discourse. There was still no translator, and I was thinking, what is she going to record? There won't be any lecture. The hall was full, about 30 people, and it was time for the lecture, so I got up on the podium and started to speak in French. I'm sure that it was not great French, but from time to time I queried the audience and said, "Comprenez-vous?" Do you understand? And they nodded their heads, so yes, so I continued. Whatever I was saying was good enough. At the end of the lecture, a young man in his 20s came forward and said he wanted to learn meditation. He went to his friend's house, and I taught him meditation. Within a week or so, he moved in with us in our center in Lyon and became a full-time volunteer for Ananda Marga. So a lecture that I thought would have to be canceled ended up as a success. In the days ahead, I would improve my French language skills. Baba himself was quite pleased with this and said so when I finally met him about 2 years later. On the road in France. My first big tour of Paris region was done with one of the French volunteers, Ramakrishna. Lectures had been prepared for us in a number of cities, including Poitiers in the west of France, Saint-Brieuc in Brittany, Tours in the center of France, and Grenoble in the French Alps, not far from our base in Lyon. On this trip, I didn't have to worry about giving the lectures in French because Ramakrishna translated my discourses. However, I had to get acquainted with life on the road, often making my way around France with little money and sometimes without secure accommodations. We took the train from Lyon to Poitiers, where a well-organized lecture was waiting for us. After the lecture, I was able to initiate some people into the practice of meditation. Ramakrishna also assisted me in translating the individual lessons, but he left the room when I gave mantras and other instruction particular to the individual. At the lecture, we placed a donation bowl, and with the money collected, we were able to purchase tickets to the next stop on the tour, Saint-Brieuc. I am not sure who arranged the lecture in Saint-Brieuc, but it was a full house. After the lecture, I again initiated several people, many of whom were doctors and professionals. It was a big success, but we forgot one thing. We forgot to ask for donations to help sustain our tour. So the next day we were without funds and had to get to the city of Tours, where some university students had organized a lecture for us. We did what I used to do in California. We went out on the road and stuck out our thumbs trying to hitch a ride. But France was not like California of the late 1960s, where hitchhiking was common. It was difficult getting rides, but we were persistent and miraculously made it to Tours just in time to give the lecture. After that close experience, I learned one thing. Near the end of each of my lectures, I would say, the mantras that I give are free of charge, but when I have to travel on the train, it costs money. So if you would like to help me continue my tour, you can leave a donation in the bowl on the table in the back of the room. The lecture in Tours was effective, and again, several people came forward to learn meditation. The next day, we left Tours and triumphantly returned to our headquarters in Lyon. My first trip had been successful. I was new at it, but it seemed easy. Later, I was to learn that many people were enthusiastic to begin meditation, but only a few were able to diligently continue the practice after I left their town. A short time after this trip to the west of France, we were off again, this time to Grenoble, a picturesque city in the mountains, not far from Lyon. Traveling with me was Ramakrishna and a special guest, Dada K. Dada was a skilled lecturer and had built up Ananda Marga in Europe in the years from 1972 to 77. Our lecture in Grenoble attracted many people, and Dada gave a great lecture that inspired several people who expressed interest in learning meditation. There was only one problem. We had nowhere to stay and no place where we could teach people meditation. As I was to learn, the usual practice for Ananda Marga teachers in Europe at that time was simply to ask the audience if anyone could put us up for the night. However, this time we forgot to ask. The lecture had ended and we were without a place. Hurriedly, we talked to a few people and one woman offered to put us up in her house. We told the people who wanted to learn meditation to come to that address in the morning. All she could offer us was some space on the linoleum floor of her kitchen. Dada K, Ramakrishna, and I had to lay our sleeping bags out in the cramped quarters with one or two of us directly under the table. Sometime in the middle of the night, someone else entered the apartment. It was the woman's boyfriend. He didn't like the idea of having 3 yogis camped out in the kitchen and told us to leave immediately. So we packed up our things and left the house. We waited outside till morning in that location because we had told the people interested in learning meditation to meet us there the next day. In the morning, some of the people came and we explained our predicament. One young woman offered us shelter in her apartment. She said we could stay there overnight. We could also teach meditation there. We taught meditation to a number of people and even held a collective meditation session in the evening for the new students. Just as I had learned in Saint-Brieuc to be particular in asking for donations to help sustain the tour, I learned in Grenoble to make sure that I asked for help with accommodations. It usually worked for me, but sometimes I ended up with some unusual accommodations. Rescued in ruin. During my years in France, I made it a point to try to bring Ananda Marga to places where I thought it didn't already exist. For example, once some Margis from Paris organized a lecture for me in Rouen, a city in Normandy not far from Paris. They arranged a place for the lecture and put up the posters, but the rest was up to me. I had to go there by train, give the lecture, and hope that someone attending the lecture would be interested in learning meditation and would also be willing to give me a place to spend the night. That was the way I covered new territory. I never had enough money for hotels and depended on the hospitality of the people I would meet. So I traveled to Rowan and reached the lecture venue, a public library located far from the city center. About 20 people attended the lecture, but as it turned out, they were not interested in learning meditation or making deeper contact with me or Ananda Marga. When the lecture ended, the audience began to leave the library, and I realized that I was not very successful this time. I got my things together, a guitar and a travel bag with my clothing, and started to walk slowly back to the city center. My plan was to spend the night in the train station and take the morning train back to Paris. As I approached the city center, a car stopped. A young man opened the window and said, "What movement are you in?" I told him I was in Ananda Marga, and the young man replied, "So am I." I got into the car, and my newfound friend told me that he had been initiated into Ananda Marga meditation a year or two earlier by Dada Veda, a French Acharya. He also told me that he usually didn't go out at night, nor did he usually drive in the area where I was walking. But on this particular night, his father sent him on an errand that took him there. We both realized that this was Baba's grace and appreciated what had happened. He then arranged for me to spend the night with some university students. I was spared a night in the train station's waiting room and returned to Paris the next day. Orleans and Dharmaputra. I experienced a simple incident in the beautiful city of Orleans. Once again, Margis from Paris organized the lecture. I traveled there by train with a Govinda who served as my translator. Speaking of trains, lovely sound effects there. The lecture seemed to go well. I spoke about the benefits of meditation and a good number of people attended. While I was giving the lecture, I noticed a young man in the first row who was really enjoying the lecture. He was positively glowing with interest. When I finished speaking, a number of people crowded around me asking questions. However, these people were only intellectually interested. They had no intention of learning meditation. One by one, they started leaving, but in the meantime, the glowing guy from the first row also left. At the end, it was just Govinda and me alone in the lecture hall. Dada Veda likes the sound effects. I told Govinda that there was nothing more we could do in Orleans and that we should just go back to the station and take the next train back to Paris. When we reached the station, we looked at the schedule and saw that there were no more trains back to Paris that night. So we went to the waiting room, ready to spend the night there. After some time, I wanted to do my night meditation, so I went to the restroom to wash and get refreshed for meditation. As I walked to the restroom, I passed a cafe and was surprised to see the same young man sitting at a table with one of his friends. He asked me what had happened, and I explained our situation. He offered us a place to stay on the floor of his small studio apartment, which happened to be right across the street from the train station. As it turned out, he was indeed keenly interested in meditation, and the next morning I taught him meditation before taking the train back to Paris. That young man, who later took the Sanskrit name Dharmaputra, continued to meditate and was instrumental in organizing further events in Orleans and elsewhere in central France. Did you hear my stomach? It's starting to growl. Food and accommodations in Bayonne. Speaking of growling stomachs, we used to hear via the Ananda Marga grapevine various comments that Baba had made or was said to have made regarding a wide variety of subjects. I had heard that Baba once said that his whole-time workers would always have food regardless of the conditions. I never heard that he had said anything about accommodations. Both of these factors were tested when I visited Bayonne. Bayonne is a city on the southwest coast of France near the Spanish border. One Margi urged me to go there because it was in a region inhabited by the Basque people, an ethnic group whose homeland lies in northwest Spain and a small corner of France. He had heard, again through the grapevine, that Baba had said something about the importance of the Basques in establishing ideal regional socio-economic zones. It was an area I had not yet visited. I had no contacts in the city, but I wanted to give it a try since I was already visiting Bordeaux, which was not far from Bayonne. So one day I went there by train and decided to employ my usual strategy when I visited a new place. First get a room for a lecture, then put up posters, then visit a newspaper office hoping to get an article printed about the upcoming lecture. Once that was done, I would try to find accommodation for the night and leave the next day, coming back in a few days to give the lecture. I jumped off the train in Bayonne and went to secure a lecture room. In France, the city halls usually have rooms that are free for nonprofit activities. I went to the city administrative center, and sure enough, I was able to reserve a lecture room for the following week. Next, I planned to visit the city's main newspaper. While I was hustling around, I met someone who seemed to be the town drunk. He had a beard, long hair, and scruffy clothes, and smelled like he'd been drinking wine. He was quite friendly and offered me a place to spend the night. I asked him where his residence was, and he told me that it was in the bandstand in the park. Many parks in France have old-fashioned circular open-air bandstands with a covered roof. This didn't seem like much help, so I told him that I would think about it. I thought I would be able to do better than spending the night in the park, but I didn't say that to my new friend. My visit to the newspaper office went well. I spoke to a journalist who said he would write an article about my upcoming lecture. Next, I printed some posters and put them up at strategic places in the city. By the time I had finished placing the posters, it was almost evening and shops were beginning to close. I was so busy putting up the posters that I forgot to buy food and also did not get any chance to ask other people about accommodations. After the frantic effort to get all the posters up, I sat on a bench in one of the city's small squares. As I rested there, 2 young men came by and struck up a conversation with me. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "I'm a yoga teacher. I'm organizing a lecture here in Bayonne." The conversation continued, and soon they asked me where I was going to stay. I told them that I didn't have a place to stay. One of them looked at my duffel bag and said, "But surely you have some food." I told them that I did not have any food. Ananda Marga monks are not supposed to eat in restaurants, and I had no intention of doing anything further about the food situation since all the grocery stores had closed. But I didn't say this to the young man. When he heard that I didn't have any food, he said, "We are sailors on a ship docked in the harbor. We can't put you up for the night, but we can get some food from our ship's kitchen." They rushed off, and I waited on the bench. Sure enough, they returned in a short time with some cheese sandwiches and fruit. I thanked them, ate the food, and then thought about what to do next. Oh, Carrie's got an order. Good luck. I'll take a sip of my coffee. I decided to take up the offer made earlier in the day by the scruffy guy who lived in the park. I went to the park and saw the bandstand. The man welcomed me to his abode, and I lay my sleeping bag out and tried to get some sleep. It became quite cold in the middle of the night, and I had difficulty sleeping, but then the man laid an old and dirty blanket around me, and I was able to sleep the rest of the night. It reminded me of lyrics to the song "To Try for the Sun" by Dada Veda. We huddled in a derelict building, and when he thought that I was asleep, he laid his poor coat round my shoulder and shivered there beside me in a heap. The next day when I awoke, I thanked the man for his kindness and went on my way. I left Bayonne and returned a few days later for the lecture. I taught meditation to one man who also offered me accommodations for the night. From this and a few other experiences, I concluded that deluxe accommodations are not guaranteed to roving acharyas, but I didn't mind because I enjoyed the adventure of going into the unknown and seeing what would happen. What I came to realize is that if you want to experience some divine grace and miraculous happenings, it is better to be insecure and go out on a limb in your quest to do something noble, rather than sit at home with your good food and secure accommodations. Oh, I like that. You can get a little closer now and adjust. Does anyone have any questions for Dada Veda? He's here in the chat. We're so blessed to have him here for this. All right. All right, here's a photo. At a Europe-wide retreat in Italy, August 1978, Dada Veda is the first monk on the right wearing white pants. Baba is released from prison. In the summer of 1978, we started to receive some good news from India. First, in July, the High Court in India dismissed the case against Baba, which meant that he would soon be released from prison. Then, on August 2nd, we learned that Baba had been released with great fanfare, including an elephant-led procession down the streets of Patna. I was elated to hear the news and knew that very soon I would get a chance to meet Baba. After the celebrations had ended in India, Baba got down to work and started to give a new shape to the organization, emphasizing the role of elected district secretaries, Bhukti Pradhans, and adding some new departments as well. I later learned that as soon as Baba had described the duties and responsibilities of the Bhukti Pradhans, he began to ask consistently if they had been elected in the various districts. Out of the blue, he asked, "Has the Bhukti Pradhan of Grimsby been elected yet?" The monks in the Ananda Marga Central Office didn't have a clue to where or what Grimsby was, but later found out that it was a fishing port in England where there weren't any Ananda Marga activities yet. In late September, Dada K came to Lyon and gave me a long list of the new organizational instructions. He said that Baba had also introduced a new yogic dance. In 1971, Baba had revived Shiva's jumping Tandava dance for men, and immediately afterward, the women of Ananda Marga wanted a dance that they could do. On September 6, 1978, Baba started teaching the Kaushiki dance. The new dance was a moving yoga posture with 16 different positions and was said to prevent 22 different ailments. Although the dance is particularly good for women, Baba also said that the men should do it too. I found the dance difficult at first, but soon got the hang of it and began practicing it daily. Oh, I'm glad to hear you're enjoying it, Odd. I'm enjoying it too. It's so good to get to know your life, Dada. It's so fascinating. Baba in Switzerland. Now that Baba had been released from prison, my 8-year wait to see him was about to come to an end. Soon after his release, it was believed that he would soon embark on a world tour. In the spring of 1979, the world tour was announced, and we were told that Baba was coming to Europe and that his first stop would be Switzerland. On May 6, 1979, I went to the Geneva airport, which was not very far from my office in Lyon. There was an amazing scene at the airport. Margis from all parts of Europe converged on the airport and waited for Baba. There was an aspect of suspense because the passports and visa formalities of Baba and the Indian nationals who were accompanying him were completed at the last minute, and those of us who were waiting didn't know if Baba was coming for sure. Instead of biting our nails and just sitting there, we started to sing, dance, and chant the Baba Nam Kevalam mantra. Switzerland is a very conservative, more formal place, so this spontaneous show of devotion at a busy airport was unprecedented. Several hundred devotees were singing for several hours, creating a festive spiritual atmosphere in the airport. Baba Nam Kevalam, Baba Nam Kevalam, Baba Nam Kevalam. Finally, we heard that Baba's plane was arriving. We crowded to the place where arriving passengers entered the terminal after having cleared immigrations and customs. I was still not completely sure that Baba was actually there, but when I caught a glimpse of Dada Ramananda, Baba's personal secretary, I knew that this was the real thing and that my long wait to see Baba was about to end. I had met Dada Ramananda in 1972 when he visited our office in Wichita. A second after glimpsing Dada Ramananda, I saw Baba coming through the crowd. He looked different than he had in the photos I was familiar with. Those photos had been taken before Baba's imprisonment. In the 7 years of incarceration, Baba had lost some hair. To me, he now resembled Prabhupada, the guru of the Hare Krishna movement, whom I had seen in New York in 1968 and later in San Francisco in 1970. Baba and his entourage went to a small lounge area, and Baba took a seat with Margis, monks, and nuns from the various parts of Europe spread out on the floor in front of him. The Ananda Marga procedure for receiving Baba in an airport was to hold a special display of 2 yogic dances. The first dance was Tandava. A few of the Margi brothers, decked out in the official Tandava uniform of green shorts and a purple singlet shirt, with knives and plastic skulls, began the dance. They danced for a short time, and when they were finished, Baba said, "Bravo." After the Tandava, the next yogic dance was Kaushiki. Now it was the sisters' turn to impress Baba with their performance. For these ceremonial performances of the dance, there was a prescribed uniform that Baba had introduced in India. For the women, it was a maroon-colored Indian sari with a green blouse. However, when the instructions for the uniform were received in Europe, some of the acharyas felt that a Western uniform would be more appropriate. So someone designed an alternative Kaushiki uniform, which had a more European skirt and blouse combination. On the day that Baba landed, there were several Margi sisters decked out in the alternative uniform, and after the brothers were finished performing Tandava, they stood in front of Baba and started the dance. After a short time they finished, and Baba smiled and said, "Super bravo." Later we came to know that Baba did not approve of the new Kaushiki uniform. He explained that there is a certain order to this universe, and that even a small alteration was made, then the whole universe was affected. He said that even if a small ant dies a premature death, then it has wide implications. In this context, he said that the Kaushiki uniform that he gave should not be changed. In subsequent performances of the dance in Europe, the standard Kaushiki uniform was worn by the Margi women. My personal contact with Baba. Following his arrival in Geneva, Baba and his entourage, consisting of 10 people from India, went by car to Fiche. Traveling with Baba was his nephew, Dr. Pathak, and 8 monks and nuns. Fiche was a small village in central Switzerland with many ski resorts. We rented several buildings at one of these resorts. Baba stayed in one chalet, and the Margis were housed in dormitories. A large sports hall was used as the meeting place where Baba addressed the assembled Margis. Several hundred devotees, mostly from Europe, but a few from all over the world, were on hand. The day after Baba arrived, he began his work. One of the first items on the agenda was personal contact. In personal contact, Baba would meet alone with a disciple. Often he would correct mistakes made by the disciple and then give a blessing. Most people experience this as a transformative moment in their life. As I was already an acharya and had not yet met Baba, I was one of the first people on the list to get personal contact. I am writing this more than 30 years after the event, so some details may be missing, but this is what happened to me. I went into the room, and Baba was seated on his bed. I sat on the floor in front of him, and he said, "Be at ease, come closer." Then he asked me, "What is your name and organizational designation?" I replied, Veda Garba Brahmachari, R.S. Paris, Regional Secretary, Paris Region. Baba looked at me and said in a dramatic way, "Such a huge responsibility." Indeed, in India, a regional secretary of Ananda Marga was someone with a big job, usually with several acharyas working under him and with various schools and social projects to supervise. However, in France, I was the lone Dada with hardly 20 Margis in the whole country. Baba repeated dramatically, "Such a vast responsibility," and then quickly added, "But you are such a little boy." This was the Baba's charm. You could be an aged person with much experience in the world, but when you came in front of him, you did indeed feel like a small boy with a loving father. At the time of my personal contact, I was 32 years old and thought I was already mature, but for that moment, I was a little boy again. Baba then asked me questions about my work. "How many Margis have come here from Paris region?" "Close to 20 have come," I replied. "And will there be a program for me in France?" Shortly before the Fiche gathering, we began preparing a tour for Baba in other parts of Europe, and France was one of the places that Baba was scheduled to visit. "Yes," I replied, and Baba smiled. He was now reclining and looked like the reclining Buddha statues that I was to see a few years later in Bangkok. Then, with a lot of happiness showing in his face, Baba said, "And you are learning French?" It wasn't a question. Baba knew that I was slowly working to master the language. Out of nowhere, Baba said, "Veda Garba, ruler of the cosmic knowledge." When he said this, I felt like the actual ruler of the cosmic knowledge was speaking to me. The syllables vibrated with a tremendous power, filling the entire room and the space around me. Baba was explaining the meaning of my name, not with mere words, but with a real demonstration. Then he placed his hands on my head and gave me a blessing. He said, "May spiritual success crown all that you do." I gave him my salutations and left the room floating on air. And here they are at the Geneva airport with Baba on the right. Baba in France. Not long after meeting Baba in Switzerland, I saw him in Lyon. 8 years earlier, I had a wish that Baba would visit our bungalow headquarters near the Pacific Ocean. That, of course, didn't happen, but now in Lyon, I got my wish. Prior to Baba's arrival, we made plans how to receive him, his team of acharyas from Ananda Marga's central office, other monks from different parts of Europe, and the more than 100 Margis who expected to attend. The Margis would be lodged in nearby hostels, while the monks would stay in the Jagrati. Discourses and meals would be in the large hall. A room was fixed up in the rear of the Jagrati, where Baba would give personal contact and also hold meetings. In an adjacent room, which housed our small printing press, we placed a portable chemical toilet for Baba's use. Our plan was to have Baba stay in the Jagrati only during the day and evenings. At night, we thought it would be better for him to stay in a nearby hotel. We did not have a proper bathroom adjoining Baba's room, so some monks suggested that a hotel would be more comfortable. However, when Baba arrived, he turned those plans upside down. After an eventful visit to Valencia, Baba arrived at Lyon Airport on Friday, June 1st, 1979. A large banner proclaimed in French, "Welcome to our Guru Sri Ananda Murti," and Margis sang kirtan as he arrived. The yogic dances, Kaushiki and Randava with a live snake, were also performed at the airport. Baba was then taken to a hotel not far from the Jagrati. Shortly after arriving at the hotel, Baba called a brief meeting of some senior acharyas, I was not present, in which he told them that it would not be proper to stay at the hotel. He explained that his presence there would disturb the other guests, and then he gave them an ultimatum. Either make the Jagrati ready for receiving him, or he would cancel the Lyon program and continue on to Italy. The Dadas at the hotel quickly called us at the Jagrati and told us the news. We scratched our heads, wondering how we could set up bathing facilities for Baba. After a quick search in the courtyard of the tenement building, one brother found an old iron tub, the kind people normally use for washing laundry. We put this laundry tub in the printing press room and attached hoses to the tap of the sink that was in that room. We then called the hotel, informing the acharyas that we were ready to receive Baba in the Jagrati, since we now had bathing facilities in the room next to the room where Baba would sleep and give personal contact. Just prior to Baba's arrival at the Jagrati, I peeked into the room where he would be staying during the weekend. Everything was in place. His bed, a pratik, the Ananda Marga emblem on the wall, and his writing table. As I put my head into his room, I felt a tingling, like electricity vibrating through the room. I then went to the main hall where Margis were beginning to arrive. They were seated on the floor in long rows with a long tablecloth running down the middle of the hall. We were serving dinner to these Margis when all of a sudden Baba arrived. When he passed through the entrance, which led directly into the main hall, the surprised diners looked up to see their guru striding in nonchalantly. Baba looked at everyone and said, "Continue doing your duty." He then led into his room, where he took up residence in our humble apartment. Once Baba was comfortably installed, we expected that he would be ready to give a discourse. About 100 devotees from France and other parts of Europe were waiting for him in the main hall, but behind the scenes there was another problem. Baba called a meeting of the acharyas. We crowded into his small room, and then Baba said, "I am not very happy with the work in Paris region." He said this with a very sad face, almost like that of a little boy who had lost his favorite toy. As a result, there was no darshan that first evening. Collective meditation was held instead. The only way that we could save the situation was to give a good report of the work that we had done in France, as well as credible assurance that we would do even better in the future. Since I was the regional secretary, the burden fell on me to provide the information that could change his mind, so I prepared the report. One of the crucial items was the list of district secretaries, Bhukti Pradhans. At that time, our region was divided into 32 districts. In reality, we hardly had more than 20 Margis, since we had only recently started working in France. Dada K, our sectorial secretary, gave me some advice. Prepare a complete list of all the Bhukti Pradhans, 100% complete. I used my imagination and came up with a secretary for every district. Then I submitted the inflated report to the Central Education and Relief Secretary. He looked it over, then looked at me, and in all earnestness said, "Can you give me anything more?" Frankly, I thought he was crazy. I already was giving a report that was too good to be true. In any case, it worked. The next day, Baba began giving a series of discourses that were very deep intellectually, but as usual culminated with the advice that merger with Parama Purusha, supreme consciousness, is the ultimate goal of human life. These discourses can be found in the Ananda Vakanamartam books. Along with the discourses, there were daily meetings. The acharyas crowded into Baba's bedroom where he took reports of our social and spiritual work. While Baba was sometimes very severe in his role as president of the organization, during his time in France he was in a light and loving mood. For example, he opened one reporting session with the word école. The education secretary was confused till Baba told him that this was the French word for school. One day, during the meeting with the acharyas, he asked Dada Vedananda, "How many offices of your department have you opened in Paris region?" Dada replied, 3, Baba." "What, only 3? Baba replied. "Didn't you take the help of all those Bhukti Pradhans?" Then Baba looked directly at me and with a twinkle in his eye, he continued, "I guess some of those Bhukti Pradhans aren't very active, are they?" Later, in a more serious mood, Baba added, "Paris and Gibraltar regions are good fields, but our action here was belated." He encouraged us to work harder to bring spirituality to all the people within our regions. Julie says, "Awesome and interesting, Dada Veda." I agree. I'm glad I didn't have to give up my coffee today, only the cream. But I will be switching to tea shortly. And water. And broth. Field walk along the Rhone River. In addition to meetings and discourses, Baba's daily walks were also wonderful events. I was fortunate enough to go on one of these walks. It was a cloudy evening, and the walk took place on the bank of the Rhone River, only a few blocks from the Jagrati. Walking with Baba were a few monks, Baba's nephew, Dr. Pathak of Patna, security personnel, and about 15 Margis. We walked briskly along the river, and then Baba asked, "What is the name of this river?" Baba's nephew, Paltu, who was then an adolescent, answered, "The Rhine." I corrected Paltu and said, "It's the Rhone." Baba smiled and said, "Yes, it's the Rhone." Then Baba asked me, "Is the Rhone navigable for its entire distance?" I mumbled some answer, but I really didn't know. Baba continued the conversation and then asked us if we knew the Latin word for water. Then he asked for the French and Spanish equivalents. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Did you know that 1,500 years ago, French and Italian were the same language?" We continued on a few more yards and then stopped. A folding chair was set up, Baba sat down, and everyone gathered around him. It started to drizzle, and someone opened an umbrella for Baba. Baba was shielded from the rain, but we were not. Baba said perhaps we should go, due to the rain, but everyone said it's okay, and we stayed on. Baba gazed across the river, and it looked like he was peering into eternity. Then he looked at us and began to speak. I can't remember all that he said, but a few things stick in my mind. He pointed to the place on his face where the nose ends and the eyebrows begin. In yoga, this area is called Trikuti, and said, there is a branch of astrology that explains that if one studies the structure of this part of the face, then one can know everything about that person. Then he added, this is such a difficult science that even if I wanted to teach it, I wouldn't be able to find students capable of learning it. The atmosphere was incredibly charged with love, radiating from the Margis to Baba and from Baba to us. Some Margis were crying, and at one point Baba looked at Devashish, seated just in front of him. Baba gave him a tremendous smile of love. When Baba smiled directly at a person, it was like no other smile that can be imagined, intense, playful, and filled with love, stretching from ear to ear. Then Baba said something of a very serious nature. He said that we have to look after the interests of the less vocal members of the human society, those people who are facing difficulties but are not capable of expressing their problems. Many years later, I would write a song, As the World Spins Around, about these less vocal people and our responsibility to them. There's Dada Veda with a guitar. Finally, our time was up, and we reluctantly walked the short distance back to the Jagrati, where Baba would give the evening discourse. Personal contact, Kaushiki Tandava. During Baba's visit to France, we came closer to him spiritually. Due to the fact that he was staying in our small Jagrati, we spent much time in close physical proximity to him. Some of the big events of this visit were the sessions of personal contact, PC. In Lyon, part of each day was set aside for personal contacts. Several young men received personal contact, but one in particular remains in my memory. Normally after PC, the aspirants came out of the room with big smiles on their faces and then went somewhere to sit down and do meditation. However, one young man came out looking bewildered and sad. As he was my initiate, I was particularly concerned, so I went over to him and asked him what happened. He said, "Baba told me to become a monk." He was troubled by this since he had no such plans or intentions in mind. I said, "That doesn't sound right. Baba doesn't usually say this kind of thing to a person during PC. What did Baba actually say?" The young man explained that Baba had told him to be an ascetic, the French word for hermit or monk, ascetic in English. I said, "No, Baba didn't say that. He told you to be an asset to the human society." When he heard this explanation, he came out of his gloom and brightened up like the other people who had received PC that day. As many people have explained, Baba has a vast knowledge of many languages. During the personal contact in France, Baba spoke in English, and hence the confusion of the previously mentioned initiate. However, one of the young men initiated that day told me that Baba made him take an oath in French. Baba said the French sentence, "Je veux être un bon garçon." I want to be a good boy, and had the brother repeat it. "How was the Baba's accent?" I asked him. "Perfect," he replied. One of the charming features of Baba's visits to France and other places was the performance by Margis of Kaushiki and Tandava. It was performed at the airport and before each darshan. Our Jagrati was not on the ground floor, and the neighbors below were sensitive to loud noise made by dancing in our meditation hall. So during the performance of Kaushiki and Tandava, there were only 2 or 3 dancers. Before one of the afternoon discourses, there was a very unusual performance of Kaushiki. Dada Rudreshvarananda led the dance, calling out the rhythm with the mantra, and 2 recently initiated boys were trying to perform the dance, which is quite complicated for beginners. That day, one boy was bending forward while the other was bending sideways. To make matters worse, Dada made a mistake calling out the rhythm. Still, when it was over, Baba said, "Very good," with a big smile, and everyone laughed. Then Baba explained, the foot movements were not correct, the body movements were not correct, and even the calling was not correct, but still I say very good. Why? Because I like to give encouragement. The Tandava dance was performed using a live snake. We had a small garden snake that accompanied Baba through several cities of the tour, including Stockholm, Rotterdam, and Valencia. During the performance one afternoon, Baba remarked that one performs Tandava, the snake must be venomous. He repeated, the snake must be venomous. The snake was not venomous, fortunately, for I heard that somewhere on the tour he bit one dancer who didn't hold him correctly. However, the snake, not the dancer, passed away during the tour. A historic moment. Within the confines of the Lyon Jagrati, we passed many remarkable moments with our spiritual master. One event that took place at that time seemed like just another light moment, consistent with Baba's jovial mood during the visit. However, seen from my perspective, it was rather historic. One afternoon, Baba gathered together the acharyas and told us that we would now have to start work in the communist countries. Up to that time, our work had been concentrated in Western Europe. Our mission had started in Germany, went to Scandinavia and down to Italy, and later expanded to France and the Iberian Peninsula. Now Baba was asking us to cross the Iron Curtain and go into Eastern Europe. Baba started to give us some instructions regarding this new development. He said, "How will you work when you go to these countries? You will have to do everything subterranean." He put great emphasis on the word subterranean, and as he said it, he made a motion with his hand. Baba was standing, but he bent over low and held his hand a few inches from the floor and moved it forward in a line parallel with the floor and said again, "You will have to do everything subterranean." I had in fact met one family acharya in the U.S. who had gone to Moscow in the early 1960s. He was there for only a short time, but said that when people came to his house to talk about meditation, they were quite afraid and didn't dare to take their shoes off while they were in his apartment. Then Baba said, "But there is one thing which cannot be done subterranean. Do you know what that is?" Everyone was silent. Then Baba solemnly broke the silence and said the words, pronouncing each syllable carefully. He said, "Baba Nam Kevalam." After that, we did indeed venture into these countries to spread the seeds of Dharma, spirituality. Despite any forebodings we may have had, our monks and nuns met with great success. As everyone now knows, by 1989, the mentality of the people of Eastern Europe changed, and communism came to an end. Who can say, but perhaps our workers, taking their cue from Baba that day in Lyon, played a role in this transformation of consciousness that altered the map of Europe. Baba's departure from France. All good things in this world have to come to an end one day, and Baba's historic visit to France was no exception. After spending a weekend with us, Baba's departure loomed, but it was not without some interesting surprises. Before I get to the ending, however, I have to make one observation. Baba really was at home within the confines of our small Jagrati. The same Jagrati that we thought was not fit to house Baba turned out to be much to his liking. After the last evening discourse, Baba was in such a relaxed mood that he wandered out of his room in the rear of the apartment and moved about in the forward rooms. Dressed only in a t-shirt and lungi, Baba freely conversed with Margis, who entreated him to please make another visit to the region sometime soon. The next morning, Baba and his team got ready to go to the Lyon airport. They were to catch a short flight to Milano, where the Margis of Rome region were getting ready to receive him with all the love in their hearts. I cannot remember the events of that morning except for one. Sometime after Baba had departed, I was in our kitchen with some LFTs. We were exhausted after playing host to Baba, as well as the visiting monks and nuns and Margis. The place was in something of a shambles. All of a sudden, we got a phone call. Someone at the airport was calling us excitedly. "Baba is back," they said, jolting us out of our relaxation. Despite having valid visas, Baba's party was denied entry into Italy and had to return to the Lyon airport. Apparently, some instructions from a very high level were given to block his entry. We jumped into a car and drove swiftly to the airport. A special expressway goes from Lyon to the airport, which is 20 miles outside of the city. When we were halfway to the airport, we saw a car with Baba and his personal assistant, Dada Ramananda, on the other side of the highway, heading toward the city. We continued toward the airport anyway to pick up the other members of Baba's team. After getting them, we went back to the Jagrati. Everything had been put back in order, and Baba relaxed in his room talking to the monks. The French authorities had granted Baba 30 additional days entry into France, but Baba decided to only rest briefly in Lyon and then fly back to India via Paris. We enjoyed his presence for that one extra day. The next morning, we took him back to the airport. As Baba walked down a ramp leading to the check-in counter, followed by someone carrying a single piece of baggage marked PR Sarkar, I marveled how one small, simply dressed man could have such a great impact on the world. There are two more incidents of that day that I fondly recall. After Baba left, a few remaining Margis went into his room and some did meditation there. That is understandable, but what really surprised me was when I walked into the room adjacent to Baba's, the one where we had put a portable toilet and a washtub bath, and found one Margi sitting on the floor in blissful meditation next to Baba's bathtub. I then went into the room that normally was my office. During Baba's stay, it was Dada Ramananda's quarters. Now a few monks were there. Dada Dharma Vedananda was exhausted and had fallen asleep. During the entire one-month tour, he accompanied Baba everywhere, organizing the security arrangements and the field walks. He was sleeping, but his mind was still engaged in the events of the previous days. He started speaking in his sleep and called out, "Where can we take Baba tonight for the field walk?" I decided to answer him and said, "We can take him along the Rhone River," thinking that would be the end of it. But Dada replied, still sleeping, "No, we can't take him there. He was there yesterday." We get a farm. The development of Ananda Marga in different regions is not a haphazard affair. In Europe in the 1970s, there was a plan for each region, which included setting up a regional office, starting a printing press, and a business to support the activities, and getting some rural land where we could hold retreats and training camps. We already had a regional office in Lyon with a small printing press, and shortly after Baba's visit, Dada K instructed us to find some land where we could set up a rural center. At first we searched in the east of France, in the vicinity of Lyon, but we didn't find anything suitable. Then one day, Guru Charan called us to tell us that he had found an old farmhouse and barn on a small plot of land not far from Rennes in northwest France where he was living. An enthusiast for this region, Brittany, he urged us to come and visit. I went there with Dada K and other Margis. The two-room farmhouse dated back to the time of the French Revolution. It had thick stone walls, small windows, thick wood ceiling beams, stone fireplaces, and an earthen floor. 30 feet from the house was a large barn, and next to the barn there was a tool shed. The 3 buildings formed a U shape with a courtyard driveway in the middle. Next to the buildings there was an area where we could start a vegetable garden. The total size of the plot was approximately 3,500 square feet, just big enough for our needs. It was a peaceful setting, surrounded by rolling cornfields, and it seemed like we should go ahead and get it. Since the land was small and the house was very old, it was modestly priced, and we were able to buy it with the help of Margies from France and abroad. Although the plot was quite small, we promptly started referring to it as the farm. Years later, at the insistence of one Margie, Baba named the project Ananda Prasuna, which means blissful flowers. Almost as soon as we received the title to the farm, we began to hold retreats there, and in the summer months I held month-long meditation intensives and social service training sessions. A Margie family moved into the farmhouse and kept the project running throughout the year. One summer, some monks from Ananda Marga's central office came to see our farm. Dada K was showing them around the place while I was trailing a few steps in front of me. They were speaking in Hindi, so I didn't know what they were saying, but when Dada lifted his arms and extended them forward and then made a sweeping motion all around his head, I caught on to the conversation. It seemed that the central Dadas were asking Dada how much land we had. It was hard to tell since there were no fences around the property. So the wily Dada K took advantage of this and raised his hands to indicate that the adjacent cornfields were part of our holdings. In later years, I contemplated buying more land adjacent to ours, but was unable to come up with the necessary funds. Despite its small size, the farm served us well. We enjoyed the retreats there, and one of my trainees from the summer training sessions went on to become a long-serving monk for Ananda Marga. And that concludes chapter 4. I think I am going to go ahead and do chapter 5 after a short break. Are y'all up for it? I hope so. All right, go refill your coffee cups or your tea cups, and I will be back shortly. Alexa, raise your volume to 10. To 5. I'm back. Oh, thank you, Dada. I know I'm probably mispronouncing some of the Indian words, but and some of the French words as well, but I'm doing my best. Are we ready for chapter 5? Looks like the cats are having a nice nap. Can you see Buddha smiling over my shoulder? I love it. Benares! I had already seen Baba in Switzerland and in France, but after nearly 11 years in Ananda Marga, I had yet to visit India. After being encouraged by many friends and colleagues, I finally decided to go, and in late December 1980, I flew to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, after having been told that it might be easier to get an Indian visa there than in the USA. When I published Sanvipra, I used to send a personal copy to India's Prime Minister. Since she was no friend of Ananda Marga, I was pretty sure that I was on the blacklist, the list of Margis who were not to be allowed into India. Because of Ananda Marga's struggles with the Indian government, any non-Indian known to be a member of Ananda Marga was denied entry into the country. In those days, before widespread computerization of records, the enforcement of such immigration policies was not uniform, and I was hoping that I would get a visa at the Indian embassy in Kathmandu. My plan was to apply for the visa, and if I didn't get it, then I would try Plan B. We didn't call it Plan B in those days, but there was an alternative way to enter India in case my visa application wasn't rejected. I went to the embassy and completed the application form. After a short wait, I saw a consular official. He told me that my visa application was not accepted and then tried to get some information out of me, such as my spiritual name. When I didn't tell him anything, he tried to apply some pressure, saying, "You were supposed to tell the truth," but I didn't budge. I had planned to enter India with or without a visa through the border at Janakpur, a town in the south of Nepal. I had booked a flight to this border town in southern Nepal, but missed my flight due to the holdup at the embassy. In the end, I had to take a bus to the border, the proverbial bus ride from hell. The bus was very crowded, and the ride was long and uncomfortable. The road was full of holes and wound dangerously through steep hills overlooking deep ravines, gorges, and valleys. Sometimes these buses would skid off the narrow roads and end up at the bottom of these frightening abysses. Thankfully, my bus made it to Janakpur without plunging to the bottom. One thing I noted on the way was the contentment of the people around me. In the West, the conditions on the bus and its slow pace would have surely led to grumpiness and a lot of complaints. But not in Nepal. Everyone was smiling. Even the babies and children on the bus were serene. The bus stopped at various towns and villages along the way to let people get off and to take new passengers. At one stop, in quite a big town, a man in a seat in front of me leaned out the window with an envelope in his hands. It was a letter addressed to someone in that town, and he was trying to get someone to deliver it for him. Sure enough, he found someone who took the letter for delivery. It was an example of the kind of cooperation and informality that is not generally found in the richer countries. After 10 or 12 hours, we arrived in Janakpur. I expected to see the lights of a small city, but there were no lights, just candles on the side of the road marking the places where small roadside stalls and shops were still open. When the bus finally stopped, there was no terminal, just darkness and some kind of parking lot. I got out and went to look for a Margi who could help me to cross into India. I had the name of one Margi and an address. Well, it was not quite a real address as we would use in most parts of the world. I told the rickshaw driver to take me to the Shiva sweet shop near the Janaki temple, and sure enough, he took me straight to the home of Shiva, a Margi who ran a sweet shop near that city's Hindu temple. The sweet shop was tiny, but there were about a dozen people working there, some washing dishes, others cleaning tables, or doing various other tasks. Shiva was a seasoned Margi, and he often helped people like me to get across the border. There was a formal border crossing where Nepali and Indian customs and immigrations people checked passports and visas, but there were also other smaller border crossings where Indians and Nepalis were able to cross back and forth without any formalities. For Indians or Nepalis, there was nothing unusual in crossing between the two countries at one of the smaller crossing points. People often lived in one country and had hard work or business in the other. They might also have relatives on the other side of the border. They were able to cross freely between the two countries without any monitoring system. I didn't look like an Indian or a Nepali, but I wanted to try entering through one of these informal crossing points since it was the only way I would be able to enter India. Shiva put me on a truck headed to the border. After that, I had to walk for 10 minutes and then take a local bus truck that went across the border. I curled up in a blanket in the back of the truck and tried to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Somehow it worked, and I made it across the border. However, when I got out of the bus and entered a small Indian village, I stuck out like a sore thumb. A whole bunch of Indian kids crowded around me, but I was able to safely find my way to a train station where I purchased a ticket to Patna, the city where Baba would be holding the year-ending spiritual gathering. When I got on the train, I was in for another new experience. I didn't know how to get a proper ticket since it was my first time in India and there was no one around to guide me. I ended up traveling without a reservation, and so the first part of the trip was quite chaotic. At one point, I was sitting on a dirty floor surrounded by passengers with big sacks of agricultural produce and other miscellaneous items that one usually doesn't encounter in passenger trains. The first train that I took before changing at a larger station was a rural train in poor condition, and that was the main reason for my distress. After changing trains, things got better and I finally reached Patna. In Patna, Baba was staying in a rented house. In the back of the house was a large tent where Baba held meetings and also gave talks to the assembled Margis. During my brief stay in Patna, a whirlwind of events took place, and certainly I've forgotten many details, but some of the remarkable moments have left an impression on my mind which will remain with me till I part from this world. I don't remember the discourses that Baba gave in Patna, but I do remember the morning his New Year's Vani message was read out. It was the custom to read this message out in as many languages as possible. The reading started with the main languages, Bengali, Hindi, and English, and then continued in many Indian languages and in languages from other parts of the world. Since I was posted in France, they asked me to read it in French. I was shy because my accent was not very good, so I let another Acharya who also spoke French do it. The reading of the Vani in all these languages created a tremendous spiritual vibration, a vibration of profound peace. Here is what was read on that day. Amidst endless reproaches and humiliations, profuse sweating and bloodshed, through the ordeal of unbearable torments and agonies, humanity has evolved to the present status. Nevertheless, it's your duty to accelerate the speed of human progress. Your endless efforts to broaden and smooth the path of human movement will render your present existence and your future history inestimable. As inspiring as this was, there was more to come. After the message was read, Baba left the tent and went back to his house. A few minutes later, someone rushed into the tent and made an announcement. He said that Baba had given an additional message to us, and he read it out. I have seen your future, and it is brighter than platinum. In another context, Baba once said, I am an incorrigible optimist. This additional message was an example of his optimism and his vision of a bright future for humanity, a bright future for those who were sitting in the tent in Patna. In addition to the spiritual discourses and the delivery of the annual message, a major item of this gathering were the organizational meetings in which Baba would take reports of the work that was being done around the world. When Baba gave discourses, he radiated spirituality and love, but when he took organizational reports, he was powerful and strict. His organizational strictness was meant to wake us up from lethargy and stir us into action. But even when he administered the organization with what seemed like an iron hand, he did it with humor and love. I didn't attend all of the reporting sessions, but one day after one of the sessions that I didn't attend, I was able to find out what happened inside the tent. Dada Veda came out and said, the whole session was focused on me. Dada was a powerful orator and a bold person, but like so many before him, he became like a little boy in front of Baba's commanding figure. I asked Dada what had happened, and he explained. Baba said to me in a scolding manner, Tabhavananda, do you know the difference between an idiot and a fool? I said that I didn't know the difference, Dada T continued. Then Baba started to explain. Baba said that a fool has innate capacity to do something but doesn't do it, while an idiot has no capacity at all and can't do a task allotted to him. Then Baba looked at me and said, which one are you, an idiot or a fool? It is also to be noted that on other occasions, Baba praised this same monk, saying that he was one of the best acharyas in the mission. According to Shiva, the founder of yoga and tantra, one of the functions of a guru is to both love and punish a disciple. The guru gives love but also gives discipline so that the disciple will succeed. The legendary story of the Tibetan yogi Milarepa and his master Marpa is a case in point. Milarepa, circa 1052 to 1032, wanted to receive initiation into spiritual practices from Marpa, but before learning anything, he had to build several stone walls and houses by hand and then demolish and rebuild them. Milarepa's shoulders were bleeding from the work of carrying the huge stones. The guru gave this onerous task to Milarepa in order to exhaust the effects of the bad deeds that Milarepa had done before turning to the spiritual path. Similarly, during reporting, Baba was a fierce taskmaster who even wielded a stick. During this period, Baba used to ask for the daily report of all monks and nuns. When I was in France, I used to write the daily report every morning and then send one copy to our European head office in Germany and one copy to India. The reports were then consolidated and sent to Baba. However, when you went to India and the reporting sessions there, you would sometimes have to give the report to Baba orally. One morning, I was in the tent along with several hundred monks. Baba was taking the daily report. One monk of German origin stood before Baba. The general secretary asked him to give his report to Baba, and all he could report was one word: nil. The daily report was a report on the work that an acharya normally does, such as giving lectures, teaching meditation, and doing various kinds of social work. Usually, when monks or nuns from outside India would go to see Baba, they left their normal routine and only attended meetings and met people whom they hadn't seen in a long time. Looking at it this way, one might be able to understand that the monk standing in front of Baba might not have anything concrete to report. But Baba didn't see it that way. He became very stern and said, "What? In the long span of 24 hours, he did nothing?" Then Baba gave the acharya physical punishment with his stick. Although I only spent a short time in Patna, I enjoyed some remarkable moments with Baba. One day, all the monks were called to Baba's house. Someone said that Baba was giving tantric abhishek. I believed that this was something like an initiation into the tantric family, but no one really explained it further. When we got into Baba's house, Baba looked at all of us and remarked, "What are so many whites doing in a sea of orange?" He was referring to the brahmacharis like me and several others who were present, along with the fully orange-clad avadhutas. Brahmacharis are in the first stage of monkhood in the Ananda Marga order. A brahmachari wears an orange tunic with either white trousers or a white lungi. Normally, the tantric abhishek would have been reserved for avadhutas, but somehow Baba allowed everyone to be present and participate. In the tantric abhishek process, Baba consecrated spiritual energy points on each monk's body, one by one, with a light touch of his stick. I have never heard of Baba doing this before or after. It was something unique. Similarly, a day later, we were in the big tent for the reporting session where we were told that Baba would bless each monk one by one. We got in a long snaking line and then crouched down and approached Baba, who put his hand on our forehead. After being touched like this, each monk sat in meditation, and many appeared to be experiencing deep states of meditation. Finally, my turn came. I crouched in front of Baba, and he touched me on the forehead, and then I sat for meditation. I could not feel anything at the time, but was grateful for being there. Some months later, I was back in France in the city of Dijon. I had set up a table to sell Ananda Marga books in the student union of the main university in that city. It was a cloudy day, and my mind was also cloudy and downcast. No one was coming to the table to look at the books or to talk to me, and I felt that I was wasting my time there. Then I remembered that my physical body had been blessed by the Guru while I was in Patna, and my outlook changed immediately. After that, the sun came out and people started to flock to my table. A gloomy day turned into a wonderful experience. I reach Benares. When the program in Patna was over, I went to the training center in Benares, Varanasi. Benares is a city along the Ganges that is renowned for spirituality. In fact, it has been called the spiritual capital of India. Our training center was located outside of the city in an old building that at one time had been a Mughal fortress. Even though the training in Sweden that I had attended provided a complete course with all elements of the Acharya syllabus, the rule was that one had to come to India to complete one's training in Benares, even if it was only for a short time. We used to joke that you had to go to Benares first and get sick, and only then could you become an Acharya. And indeed, I did suffer from digestive problems while I was there. The stomach problems that I got were probably due to the fact that Westerners are not used to the microbes that are found in Indian food and water. While I was at the training center, I witnessed a stomach problem that had another cause. One morning, I heard a boy moaning. I peeked in a room and saw some of the staff rubbing coconut oil on the stomach of one of the trainees. They explained to me that he had eaten a large number of chili peppers the night before. Indians often chew on raw chilies while they eat, but even they have limits. The brother administering the oil said that coconut oil might help by cooling down his abdomen. I stayed in Benares for 10 days, after which I went to Calcutta, where Baba and the central administration of Ananda Marga were staying. Baba continued to hold reporting sessions with the various acharyas who were present in Calcutta. While I was there, I was officially given the title of acharya, though I had been working in that capacity since leaving the Sweden Trading Center. On my last day in Calcutta, I made my way to all the central secretaries, the heads of the various departments of Ananda Marga, to get my tour program signed. Baba was a master of parliamentary procedure and formal organizations. Under the Ananda Marga umbrella, there were many departments and sub-organizations. There were general secretaries, secretary generals, chief secretaries, secretarial secretaries. It was complicated. When a monk or nun left the central headquarters to go back to the field, he or she had to meet with the department or organizational heads that had jurisdiction over his or her work. Since I was the regional secretary of Paris region, I was in charge of all the various departments of Ananda Marga for all of France, and I had to see quite a number of department heads before my tour program was officially approved. Finally, as I was about to leave, I met Dada K, who was also getting ready to depart from India, and he said, "Let's go tell Baba that we are leaving today." We went into the room where Baba was taking reports and conducting organizational business. First, Dada K went up to Baba. They spoke in an Indian language, so I didn't understand what went on. Next, it was my turn. I went up to Baba and said, "Baba, I am leaving today." Baba looked at me smiling and said, "And who gave you permission to go?" I was thinking about all the secretaries who had just signed my tour program, but I didn't say anything more to Baba. Dharma Samishka, unique in the annals of history. After my first visit to India in January 1981, I didn't have to wait long for a second visit. I hadn't planned to make another visit, but in the summer of 1981, we received a message from India saying that Baba was calling all whole-time workers, monks and nuns, as well as lay margis, to come to India for a review of their personal conduct. Often in the course of reporting and organizational meetings, Baba would point out defects in conduct of monks, nuns, or margis. This kind of random review was normal, but now Baba wanted to systematically go over the merits and demerits of each devotee one by one. As soon as I heard about this call from India, I made plans to go there again. We had just finished our summer retreat in Angers, France, and my schedule was free. Of course, raising the plane fare for India for a second time in 1 year was not easy, but somehow I was able to purchase a ticket with the help of donations from margis. This time I went to Bombay and not Nepal. From Bombay, I took a train across India to Calcutta. This was before Ananda Marga had a big ashram in Calcutta. Margis and visiting acharyas crammed into a modest multi-story building located in the Jodhpur Park section of the city. Margis were sleeping on the roof, by the sides of the building, and even out in the front on the street. Once a day, Baba would come to this building to conduct Dharma Samishka. Dharma Samishka means review of Dharma, or review of the spiritual lessons. Later, he would comment about this event, saying that it was one of the most important events in the last 15,000 years. He explained that when various gurus came on this planet, they gave lessons and teachings, but they never personally reviewed conduct and helped the disciples to overcome the bad samskaras, karma, caused by their previous misdeeds. Baba would come into the small room set aside for meetings. If he was reviewing the conduct of monks or nuns, then there would be no margi present. Baba would be seated in the front, flanked by the 1 or 2 central secretaries. The person who would be receiving the guru's scrutiny would stand in front, a few feet away from Baba. Seated in the back of the room were the other people, some of whom would also be called up in front of Baba during the course of the session. Baba would start the session by pointing out instances when a monk, nun, or disciple did not follow the strict code of spiritual discipline.
he pointed out major lapses of judgment and conduct. Since this was done in front of everyone, it was often embarrassing. Baba would then administer punishment with his stick. Sometimes it was a light tapping on the palm, in other cases, hard slaps on the back. One thing that was important about these sessions is that Baba always ended each one on a positive note. For example, after Baba pointed out my mistakes, I felt really sad, but then Baba looked at me, caught me by chin with his hand and said, "Why are you not smiling?" My psychic pain vanished and I smiled. Another common point in all the reviews was a personal prescription of yoga postures for each person. Normally, the monks and nuns of Ananda Marga prescribe specific yoga postures for each student, since each individual is unique and has unique requirements for achieving the best state of physical health. Monks and nuns generally inquire from a student about their personal health, and then, based on their knowledge of the benefits of the various postures, choose a few for the student to practice. When I first joined Ananda Marga, my acharya gave me some postures to practice. Hi, Carrie. But now it was not an ordinary acharya giving the asana prescription. It was the guru himself. In my case, Baba said, "Stand straight and don't move." These are the same instructions that you get when you go for an x-ray. But Baba did not use any machine. While I was standing there immobile, Baba looked at me, gazing up and down my body as if his eyes were x-ray machines. Then he turned to Dada Veda, who was by his side, and told him the names of some yoga postures. Baba named 4 postures in my case, and they've been very helpful to me over the course of the past 30 years. I did not make a record of the various incidents during these sessions, though if you want to read some detailed accounts of this process, you can see the book of my colleague, Dada Vedananda, Travels with the Mystic Master. However, one incident does stick out because it was so unusual and because of Baba's witty handling of the situation. I was sitting at the back of the room while Baba was reviewing the conduct of one Indian Margi. The whole thing was done in Bengali, so I could not understand what was going on. All I knew was that Baba was furious and gave strong punishment to the Margi. Finally, Baba spoke in English for the benefit of the people in the room like me who could not understand what had just happened. This boy would go to a remote village and ask the villagers to catch and kill a big rat. Then he would tell them to roast the rat over a fire, and he would then eat the rat. When I heard this, I understood why Baba was so angry with this Margi. But Baba's anger was usually momentary. It was something he displayed in order to make sure that someone had learned something from their mistake. Baba could change his mood in an instant, and he was walking out of the room. He turned to us with a smile and said in English, "Should we call it rat meat or rat flesh?" Dharma Samishka went on at a hectic pace for a few weeks, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of people had a chance to stand in front of Baba for this unique type of analysis. But each time Baba reviewed a person's conduct, he was taking on some of the karmic burden of that person, and by the end of this period, Baba became ill. After that, he stopped receiving Margis and whole-time workers. Thus, Dharma Samishka ended as suddenly as it had begun. A lemon tree for Baba. In 1982, Baba introduced an addition to Ananda Marga philosophy when he wrote the book Liberation of Intellect, Neo-Humanism. I read the book and learned that neo-humanism is an expanded form of humanism. In high school and in college, I had been introduced to humanism, a philosophy that proclaimed that humans are the measure of all things and put its emphasis on the human experience on earth, as opposed to speculating about what was happening in the heavens. At that time, I was told that humanism arose as a reaction to the excesses of religion in the Middle Ages. As I read the pages of Baba's book, I was introduced to a spiritually based humanism that included an ecological dimension. Baba said that when people expand their love to include all human beings, all living beings, and even all inanimate objects, then this is neo-humanism. Instead of confining our love only to our family or our community or our nation or our race, Baba was asking us to expand our circle of love to include all, even the plants and animals. He also said that the key to attaining this kind of outlook is by doing spiritual practices which nourish and renew our love for ourselves, for others, and for God. Immediately after the book was published, we found out that Baba wanted to put this philosophy into action by launching a huge plant conservation program. At his home in Calcutta and at the new Ananda Marga office building in Tiljala, an outlying district of Calcutta, Baba set up gardens. In these gardens, he collected rare plants from all corners of India and all corners of the world, both to save rare species of plants and also to educate us about the importance of plants. How did Baba get these plants from all over the world? Every month, representatives from the various parts of the world were coming to India for reporting. Now, instead of being required to only bring written reports, they were also required to bring plants for the garden. This often posed logistical problems for those who had to bring the plants. While I was in France preparing to go to India with hopes of becoming an avadhuta, a Dada from our European headquarters in Germany called me up and said, "Baba is asking for a lemon tree from France. Can you bring it?" I hesitated in giving an answer because I knew that there would be some difficulties. How would I buy the tree since I had very little money? How would I get it on the plane, through customs, and safely to Calcutta on the crazy Indian transport system? These thoughts were already going through my mind when the Dada on the other end of the phone said, "Baba will be so happy to get it from you." That decided it. "Yes, I will bring it," I told him. First, I had to solve the finance problem. I immediately called a Margi who was an ardent devotee and told him that Baba needed a lemon tree from France and that I was ready to bring it, but I needed help purchasing it. Without any hesitation, he agreed to send me a donation, so that problem was overcome very quickly. Next, I had to find the right tree. I was in Paris when I received the phone call. After a little investigation, I found out there is a special district in Paris where many plant sellers offer their wares. I went to this place and asked for a lemon tree. I found one that measured 3 to 4 feet tall and purchased it. When I got back to the place where I was staying, I had to figure out how to pack it. I had a big suitcase and thought about putting it inside. This would make it easier to carry and also keep it hidden, thus simplifying the customs procedures. Ordinarily, you can't bring plants across international borders without special certificates, and I didn't have time to get a certificate for the plant. However, it did not fit inside the suitcase. Then I thought that maybe I could prune the tree to make it fit, but I wasn't sure if this would harm the tree or not. I called up the place where I bought the plant and asked, "Can I cut it to make it fit in my suitcase?" But the reply was an emphatic, "Don't cut it!" So I just packed the tree using opaque plastic bags and tape and went to the airport. I took the tree on the plane as carry-on luggage because I didn't want it damaged. Somehow I was able to find a place on the plane where I could keep the tree upright and in a damage-free condition, but more obstacles were waiting for me. After landing in the Bombay airport, I went through immigration, collected my checked luggage, and went to the customs clearance line. The inspector looked at my suitcase and then saw the oddly shaped plastic bundle that was hiding my tree. He realized that it was a tree and started to get excited. "He's got a plant," he said to his supervisor, who was standing nearby. The supervisor looked at me and looked at the tree and then nonchalantly gave a flick of his hand, indicating to the customs officers to let me through. I grabbed my belongings and took a taxi to a bustling Bombay train station. It was teeming with people, and as any visitor to India knows, as you will soon find out, such places are perfect for pickpockets and other thieves. You really have to be vigilant in this kind of situation, and I was taking no chances with my precious plant. I had some time before my train would be leaving the station for the long trip to Calcutta. I was feeling hot and uncomfortable after the long flight and the trip to the train station. To my delight, I discovered that travelers could take showers in the station. I wanted to take a shower but worried about the safety of the plant, so I just took it into the shower stall with me. The next challenge was to find a good place for the tree in my train compartment. Indian trains are packed with people and luggage, and I was worrying about being able to find a suitable place for it. But as with the plane, I was lucky to find enough space for the tree, and after the long trip to the other side of the Indian subcontinent, I took my suitcase and plant and tried to find my way to the Ananda Marga Center in Tiljala. I agree, Carrie. The lemon tree probably appreciated being in the shower with you. That was my thought as well. Tiljala was at that time an outlying suburb of Calcutta. In the early part of the 1980s, Ananda Marga purchased land there and began to construct a large building surrounded by a tall boundary wall. I'd never been there before, so I just told the taxi driver to bring me to Tiljala. After the taxi let me out, I had to take a bicycle rickshaw the rest of the way to the ashram. I got on in the back seat, clutching my suitcase and my tree, but we soon got lost since neither I nor the rickshaw driver knew the proper way. Finally, however, I spotted the two Ananda Marga buildings. One building was the home of the Women's Welfare Department, where the Ananda Marga nuns stayed, and the other was the headquarters where the monks were based. Since this was my first time there, I didn't know which was which. Before I could make any inquiries, a hostile man stepped in front of the rickshaw. At this time, a communist party was in power in the state of West Bengal, and Tiljala was a communist stronghold. The Indian communists did not want Ananda Marga to spread and did whatever they could to harass our movement. This man, who may have been a communist activist or sympathizer, stood in front of the rickshaw and told me, "You don't have a visa to come and stay with AMPS." AMPS is the acronym for Ananda Marga Prakaraka Sangha, the formal name of the organization. I looked at him and quickly decided that I did not want to get into any kind of argument. I grabbed my suitcase and my plant and jumped off the rickshaw and dashed to the closest Ananda Marga structure. The door opened and I entered, feeling relief from the tension of not knowing where I was going and then having to confront the menacing man. It turned out that I had entered the Women's Welfare Department compound, but after a short time I was safely escorted to the compound where Baba conducted the reporting sessions. This was the place where I would be staying. As soon as I got inside the compound, I found my assigned room and was told where I could deposit my plant. One monk was in charge of the plants. He had a register in which he entered the type of plant and the name of the person who brought it. The next day I met this monk again and he told me that he had given it to Baba. This is how he explained it to me. Baba asked him, "Who brought this?" The monk gave my name in reply, and then Baba commented, "Oh, he speaks French." And then Baba looked at the plant and said, "But how did he get it here?" The story of the plant didn't end there. One night I was at Baba's residence in Lake Gardens, a residential middle-class area of Calcutta, where we purchased a house for Baba shortly after he came out of prison. In the early 1980s, the Lake Gardens house was Baba's principal residence. He gave discourses in main hall of the house on Sundays and also conducted organizational reporting sessions there. That night I was called to go on the field walk with Baba. Baba got into his car and sat in the back seat with Dada Vijayananda, a senior monk who translated many of Baba's books from Bengali into English. I rode in the jeep that followed Baba's car, together with the security personnel. We drove to a nearby lake. We got out of the vehicles and started walking on a path that wound its way around the lake. Baba was walking ahead, talking to Dada Vijayananda, and I was with the security people, trailing behind about 20 feet or so. Then Baba slowed down, and after a few steps, we were just behind him. He turned around and said, "Where is my Veda Garba?" I popped out of the darkness right in front of Baba. Baba looked at me with a big smile and said, "You brought me a nice present." Oh, I love that. A romantic ending. My stay in India also included my first visit to Ananda Nagar, the city of bliss. During the 1980s, much of the central administration of Ananda Marga was conducted in Calcutta, which was where Baba spent much of his time. However, the official headquarters of Ananda Marga was in a rural spiritual social service complex that Baba named Ananda Nagar. Ananda Nagar is spread out over a vast area of land in West Bengal. The land was donated to Ananda Marga by a former Maharaja, and Ananda Marga first started work there in the early 1960s. Soon, monks and nuns set up many educational and social service projects at Ananda Nagar, and for a brief time in early 1967, Baba resided there. In Ananda Nagar, the organization operates all levels of schools, ranging from a degree college to kindergartens, children's homes, a hospital, farming projects, and industries. Baba took much interest in the development of Ananda Nagar because he wanted it to help bring about an economic and cultural renaissance in India's impoverished rural areas. He proudly said, "I am the Ananda Murti of Ananda Nagar." We used to visit Ananda Nagar regularly in the 1980s, especially during the New Year's holiday when the Dharma Mahakakra, great spiritual gathering, was held. Baba would give several discourses during this event, including a special spiritual discourse that would culminate with him giving Varabhaya Mudra, a positioning of hands in which he conveyed blessings and generated waves of spiritual energy. The Dharma Mahakakra, DMC, was a festive event. People came from all over India and all over the world. But since this was a rural setting, the accommodations and the amenities were very rustic. We used to take our bath either at a well, drawing the water from buckets and splashing it over ourselves with a plastic mug, or at the small river that ran through the central portion of Ananda Nagar. There was no hot water tap, and the water could be rather cold. And here's a photo. Devotees stand in front of Baba's house in Ananda Nagar. The monk in the center is Dada Ishvar Krishnananda, and I am to his right. Dada Veda is to his right. One morning before the DMC's main events were to begin, Baba went on a tour of the facility to see how everyone was doing. He greeted us like a father welcoming the whole family to his house. He said, "I hope that you are all comfortable." He said that the water is cold, but quipped, "When you take a bath here, you accomplish your Bhuta Shuddhi." Bhuta Shuddhi is the first step of the meditation process in which you try to forget about the outside physical surroundings. And indeed, when you poured that cold Ananda Nagar water on yourself on a late December morning, you would begin to withdraw from all other sensory stimulation. C is pronounced CH in this system of Sanskrit transliteration. Thank you, Dada Veda. I'm going to try to remember that. C is CH. Okay. Another feature of our visits to Ananda Nagar in the 1980s was the cat and mouse game that we had to play with the local police. The communist government of West Bengal wanted to wipe out Ananda Marga. In fact, on April 30th, 1982, 17 monks and nuns were slaughtered in the streets of Calcutta by a mob that most people believe was led by communist activists. At Ananda Nagar, local police surrounded the area and tried to find foreigners and then detain them to get their identification information, which would be added to a government blacklist that was used to bar members of Ananda Marga from entering India. Sometimes detained foreigners were summarily deported. With this in mind, special arrangements were made for the departure of Margis who had come from abroad. In the middle of the night, we were crammed into a large truck that was closed so that no one could see what or who was inside. We were so jammed in, it was not a pleasant feeling. After a short while, the truck broke down, and much to my relief, we had to get out. It was the middle of the night, and someone led us from there on foot. We walked for several miles until we crossed the border into the neighboring state of Bihar, where there was no police or state vendetta against Ananda Marga. There we boarded buses back to Calcutta. We took this all in stride. After arriving back in Calcutta, we got refreshed and then went to Baba's residence in Lake Gardens. On our first morning back in Calcutta, Baba came out of his house for his morning walk and greeted us. Then he said, "I think that everyone enjoyed their stay at Ananda Nagar." Then with a smile, he added, "But the ending was a bit romantic." After the romance of Ananda Nagar and my India visit, I returned to France to resume my touring and lecturing. We start a granola business. Compared to the other parts of Europe, Ananda Marga in France was still underdeveloped. In Germany, Italy, Scandinavia, England, and even Iceland, the Ananda Marga centers were supported by bustling businesses. For the most part, these businesses were health food shops, and in Italy, England, and Iceland, there were also food production enterprises. Ananda Marga introduced peanut butter to Italy when one Margi started a small plant making nut butters and other health foods. Ananda Marga's Peace Eye health food stores in Berlin were also among the first stores of this kind in the country. We didn't have anything like that in France, and I was wondering how we would catch up. As I was leaving the U.S. in 1976, I noticed that some people were producing fruit and nut bars, and thought that maybe we could do something like that in France. Thinking about those bars, I went to the large Middle Eastern grocery below our Jagrati and purchased some dried fruit and nuts and made some prototypes. I even made a hand-drawn colorful label naming the product as an Ananda bar. The prototype was wrapped with clear plastic and it looked real. I showed it to the business-minded Dada K and he loved it. However, I still had to go from the prototype to actual production. While I was thinking how to do this, I also experimented in the kitchen with a batch of granola, the toasted oat breakfast cereal that seemed to come from nowhere when the hippie movement began in the late 1960s. I showed the Ananda bar and the granola to the LFTs in Lyon, and Vishal suggested that we should try to start a granola business. We started out making in the oven of our kitchen stove, and after a few months got an industrial pizza oven, which we installed in our rather large kitchen. The brand name was Vijaya, which means permanent victory. In the U.S., some Margies had started an incense-making business with the name Jaya, which means victory. I thought we should make sure that we came out on top, so I opted for permanent victory in our brand name. We packaged the granola in transparent bags, put on our labels, and we were in business. Soon we were delivering granola to close to 20 stores in Lyon. There were, of course, a number of obstacles that we had to overcome. First of all, French people at that time didn't eat big breakfasts as they do in the U.S. or in England, and they generally didn't eat breakfast cereals. Secondly, they had never heard of granola. We introduced the product in any case, and people liked it. Some of them who didn't eat a traditional breakfast just munched on it as a snack food. The biggest problem, however, was quality control. Our kitchen was not a dedicated factory, and our volunteers had many other things to do in addition to making granola. Also, the oven was not quite suited to the job. If the batch was left in the oven a few seconds too long, it could burn. We used to eat the slightly burnt granola for breakfast, and indeed we had plenty of breakfast with it. We carried on for quite a while, but one day we did some somber accounting and found out that our income equaled what we spent on ingredients, electricity for the oven, and the upkeep of our small car. It was clearly not a profitable business, so we eventually phased it out. Lyon is not just any city in France. It is an important commercial center, and though it vied with Marseille, as the second largest city in France, it is second to none in the field of gastronomy, with its restaurants and chefs regarded as the best in the country and even the world. Years later, when I told the story of how we introduced granola in Lyon to a professional chef in the U.S., he simply smiled and shook my hand. Welcome, Loto. The wisdom of yoga. When I was working France, we had a big problem. We did not have books in French about Ananda Marga philosophy. We did print a book on the spiritual practices, the 16 points, and Baba's Guide to Human Conduct, which addresses ethics, but we didn't have a French language book that offered a comprehensive look at Ananda Marga's philosophy. Lokesh, a young man from the west of France, was working with me, kept saying, "Dada, we don't have books in French. We need some as soon as possible." So I got out our old manual typewriter and started working on a book. First, I wrote a chapter on Tantra because this subject is badly misunderstood in the West. Tantra is the name given to the fundamental spiritual practices that originated in India more than 7,000 years ago. The yoga of today is based on this system of spiritual practice. Similarly, the very popular forms of Tibetan Buddhism that are now widely taught in the West also have tantric roots. However, due to the confusion that resulted from the misinterpretation of these practices, Tantra is sometimes seen as a dark practice concerned with occult powers or debauched behavior. As Ananda Marga is essentially Tantra for the modern age, I felt that it was important to explain the origins and essentials of this ancient practice. No sooner had I finished typing the first chapter when Lokesh snatched the pages out of my hand and started translating them into French. I immediately started working on the next chapter, Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 parts of yoga that lead a person to true fulfillment. Lokesh again took the pages away from me and translated them into French. I subsequently wrote chapters on yoga cosmology, reincarnation, layers of the mind, and the social philosophy of Ananda Marga, neo-humanism, and the progressive utilization theory. By the time we were finished, we had a book that gave a concise look at Ananda Marga philosophy. We called it The Wisdom of Tantra. In later editions in English and other languages, it became The Wisdom of Yoga. Although it was written in 1982 to fulfill an immediate pressing need, the book is still being used to give people the explanations they need before getting into Baba's books, many of which assume that you are familiar with the basic concepts of Ananda Marga philosophy. And here's a picture of the book, The Wisdom of Yoga. The best job in the world. That book was recently updated and is available in Dada Veda's shop. His website has been dropped in the chat a few times. You'll probably see it again. You can go to dadaveda.com or bandcamp.dadaveda.com. Oh, yeah. Scuzzlebutt is now done with his nap and he's taking a little bath. Is Jasper still asleep? Jasper, kitty kitty. If not, he's pretending to be. All right, this is the last page of chapter 5. The best job in the world. The life of an Ananda Marga, monk or nun, is up and down. We don't get a salary from our central office, and we do not have the kind of security that people with more conventional occupations enjoy. At one moment, we may be living in favorable circumstances, and at another moment, we might be homeless. But despite these uncertainties, there were and are fringe benefits that most people never get to enjoy. During the early 1980s, the summer retreats of Ananda Marga in Europe were held in France. In 1980, we held a retreat in Brittany, near Rennes, in a school that was on a summer vacation. In 1981, we held a retreat in the old chateau near Angers, in northwest France. However, we did not have a fixed place to hold the summer retreat in 1982, and since I was the person in charge for operations in France, I was the one who had to come up with a new retreat location. At this time, I was nearing the end of my stay in France. Another monk was working with me, getting ready to take over from me. His name was Dada Veda, and he was a native Frenchman from Perpignan in the south of the country. When we were given instructions to find the retreat site for 1982, we eventually narrowed our search down to a village called Tourette-sur-Loup, which is located in the southeast of the country, near the city of Nice. Nice is aptly named as it is a very nice city. It is on the Mediterranean Sea and has a wonderful climate. I haven't been there in many years, but I remember the flower pots and colorful geraniums decorating the city's houses. Even more beautiful was the surrounding countryside, where our hoped-for retreat site was located. We had the address and knew that it was located in the mountainous area northwest of Nice. We did not have a car, and it was in an area that was not covered by a regular bus service, but we somehow managed to hitchhike there. Our last ride was in a farmer's old pickup truck that took us directly to the site. Dada Veda and I were sitting in the back of an open truck as it wound its way up the curving mountainous road. We marveled at the beautiful scenery. All around us were hills dotted with small farms, and as we gazed southward, we could see the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea. Dada looked at the scenery and then turned to me and said, "We have the best job in the world." What do you think, everybody? Oh, look at that. We've only got about 3 more chapters. So we might actually finish it next week. I think this is a good stopping place, though. We covered chapter 4 and 5 today. Yep, Jasper's sleeping like a little baby. Because he is a little baby. He's my baby boy. And Scuzz is sleeping like my baby boy, too. Right, Scuzz? My 2 baby boys. I see Julie's redeeming a raffle ticket. Alrighty. I will be sure to get a screenshot. So if you missed any of today's reading, you will be able to catch the replay on my YouTube channel. And that will be available probably, I don't know, in the next hour or so. And you can catch up on previous chapters there as well. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel specifically for this book. And if you're enjoying Storytime, I now have Storytime on Saturdays as well. And we are currently reading a book by Natasha Bowen called Skin of the Sea. And we actually read the first 12 chapters already on the first day, last Saturday. You can catch it on my YouTube channel in the Skin of the Sea playlist if you'd like to join us this Saturday for the next section. Oh, you're so welcome, Dada Veda. I'm definitely enjoying it. Julie collected enough Pridadoodle points while watching the stream today that she was able to purchase a raffle ticket with it. Cool. Yay. I got a screenshot, so when I'm upstairs on Friday, I will be sure to put that ticket in the fishbowl for you, Julie. If not sooner. Probably not sooner. Probably not. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So, oh, stuff on the porch. Cool. All right, I'll get it, Carrie. Thanks for the reminder. I don't know about that marathon stream, Julie. You might catch a stream now and then. I don't know about a marathon stream, though. All right, so you'll definitely see me this Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern for Free For All Friday, acoustic music. And this weekend, and we'll be picking a winner. I'll be picking the winner of the raffle this Friday. This Sunday is Social Justice Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern, protest music. And then, of course, Karaoke Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern. And then, wait, nope, I forgot Saturday, Storytime Saturday, 12 p.m. Wow, that's 4 days in a row this week because of Social Justice Sunday. Free For All Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Storytime Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern. Social Justice Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Karaoke Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern, which also happens to be December's birthday. So we're going to have a big birthday bash on Monday. And of course, you can find all this information in my Discord and on my Linktree and on my other social media. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace out. Pride of Doodles.